Vicky's already excited. We haven't even got the show started, and Vicky's chiming in. Awesome. Hey, listen, we tonight is a big night. This is the one that everybody's been talking about. If there's anybody in the nation who is really, just has their finger on the pulse of educators and what they need right now in terms of inspiration, and it's more than motivation. It's just, Dr. Brad Johnson is with us tonight, and this guy, just the words and how he communicates online, he's the one that is able to talk to the soul of an educator. He's awesome, and we are so thankful to have him on tonight. Hey, before we get started, let me talk to you about just one thing, and that is so many schools this week, just around the nation, so many states, put the word out that schools closed, and this is it for the end of the year for this school year. And I can't tell you how proud I am of those educators that really took time to let the families know, the kids know that, listen, man, the building's closed. School is not closed. The building is closed. And where school really resides is in the family that meets every day within that building. It's not the building, it's the family in the heart of those kids. And I think it was the first one within minutes of the announcement here in Texas was Superintendent Morris Lyon from Hawkins ISD. And he hopped right there on his phone in the parking lot, getting word out to those families that he serves in that district that, listen, yes, the building is closed for sure, but school is not closed. It's our family. We're here serving meals every day. We're learning every day. We're connecting somehow as best we can every day. And school is, in fact, open and live and well in the hearts of those teachers and those kids. And it's been amazing. That's why I'm fired up to have Dr. Brad Johnson tonight. So, man, this guy has been around the block. He's been in this business for decades as an educator and a school leader. And he's one of those guys that, I'm not sure if this is what he set out to do, but I think he just has so much information and such a way of articulating himself where he's able to connect with educators around the country in terms of school culture and the important role they play in the lives of kids. I'm just glad he's here. Dr. Brad Johnson, brother, you are coming to us all the way from Atlanta, Georgia. Is that right?
Atlanta, Georgia. Yeah. Thank you for having me.
For sure. Hey, listen, man, you know what it is? I was stumbling around at the beginning, trying to figure out how to articulate what I think you do really well. And here's what it is. I have it figured out now. And this is what I always say that oftentimes we're missing in terms of school leadership is providing educators with the evidence that it's working, that what they do in the classroom is making a difference in the lives of kids. And the way that you are on Twitter and online on social media, communicating that evidence to teachers, man, it's just so important. You do such a good job at it.
Well, the main thing I say, I work a lot with leadership, and that's kind of my background, but I'm a teacher advocate, and that's my heart. I've been in education for over 25 years. And I've seen it all, experienced it all. I had the good leaders myself, and I had those that, you never talk about so that you don't, you protect the guilty.
Right.
It's one of those things, I shared today. What you opened with is right on. I said that, you can take the teacher out of the school, but you can't take the school out of the teacher. And, that's the teacher's heart. And that's what, makes me such an advocate for them is that, traveling the country too, that, teachers really do. They pour their heart and soul into what they do. Most of them see it as a calling. And that's so much more than a job.
Yeah. It's, I always, make the joke that, what other profession are you going to find people out in the parking lot crying, and just trying to deal with the emotion of the day? Like your plumber is not sitting in the van outside of your house crying about the faucet that he can't fix. It's a different world. I mean, now we're finding out clearly. I mean, I know it's not just teachers. There's nurses and our healthcare workers for sure. But this is one of those jobs. It's not just what you do. It's who you are. and it is emotional.
Well, and what bothers me, I know a lot of parents, especially I think through this crisis, really see what teachers do. But I had like a reporter the other day, like, you're pro teacher, but you're not pro education. And I'm like, if you're pro teacher, how can you not be pro education? Now you can be pro education and not really be pro teacher. We see that all the time, and the lack of
Regularly.
respect for teachers, the lack of pay, etc. But teachers really do, like you said, they pour their heart and soul into it. They miss their kids. That's probably the biggest thing right now for teachers is they want to be in the classroom. They want to be with their students and know that they're okay. So they're working hard, but they're missing that interaction, which is the key piece to education.
Man, I can't even count. Just because just like you, so many people send me a video or tag me a video. I belong to so many teacher groups or little networks and circles. Just the number of just beautiful moments, beautiful acts of humanity I've seen by teachers just in an attempt connect with their kids. And man, that's just the ones we see online. That's not even the personal stories of that I know of that no one knows about, where teachers are driving to find the kid that lives in the camper with another family. Two families live in the camper, and there she is, teaching out of her the window of her minivan. It's just it's just incredible, some of these stories.
Yeah, it really is.
Hey, I'm wondering for you, when you were growing up and you're in elementary school, junior high, high school, was teaching always the plan, or is this something you just kind of fell into?
It definitely was not. I did well in school. I wasn't like, well, here's my story. I'm very anti-standardized testing, which is funny because I blew away the standardized test, but I was bored in school because of that. And I
Yeah.
was the one that could get away with anything because he brings our test scores up, so I caught on to that quick. But no, I was like, oh, I want to be, the athlete and, that kind of thing. And still to this day, I mean, I love, I spend as much time in the gym probably as anywhere, but I guess part of it was I'm not sure. I'm not sure. But yeah, and like in sixth grade or seventh grade, I wasn't thinking, hey, I want to be a teacher. But I did have teachers that greatly influenced me by that age already. So that could have laid the foundation.
Yeah. When you think back, one of the things I always do when I'm in the airport and I'm hanging out, I'm laid over somewhere. I just have a bad habit of when I get in a conversation, I'm just thinking, I find out what they do for a living and they're telling me, and if they seem happy and passionate about it and successful, I always ask, who is that teacher that was there for you when you think back in elementary school, third, fourth, even first grade? Is there someone that comes to mind? And you know what, man? Without exception, it's 100%. Everyone can come up with that name. Everyone can come up with that teacher that was there for them that they still remember. And who was that for you?
I had two. I had one was my seventh grade science teacher, which is ironic because that's what I eventually taught as a teacher, was middle grade science. But she was a Georgia Bulldog fan, and she would do like these activities, these fun like review games where you could win. She would have like Georgia Bulldog cups and have candy in them and things like that. So I would always really review for, and all of us would, for her test. And as a teacher, I did that too. I would make review games fun and give away prizes and stuff. And it's amazing how just something as simple as that will get students to actually study for a test. So she was a big influence. Her name was Miss Mueller. I don't know if I don't think she was married at the time, so I don't know what her married name would be now. And that's a long time ago because I'm getting old. But seventh grade science, Miss Mueller, and then actually my high school principal. And I just finished a book called Principal Boot Camp that'll be out this fall, and I write about him in it. And what was interesting about him is he was always in the hallway. You never really thought of him as the principal. He would talk to us. He would stop and chat. He would come in the classroom and just sit and observe the class. He wasn't taking notes or, trying to evaluate anything. He was just listening and, building those relationships, and just such a kind person. And just, you could really feel he cared about the teachers and the students. And that was probably one of the biggest influences on me, as far as moving into leadership.
It's even at that time, that was really cutting edge leadership, because that was back in the time when it was still, you do
It
what
was
I
the
say.
80s.
So yeah, I've got the big desk, you've got the little desk. That should tell you something. All that was going on. And the idea of just building relationships was just so foreign, I think, to a lot of principals at that time.
Yeah, I think so. And today, it's tough today. I tweet a lot towards administrators, but they're really dear to my heart as well, because they have a tough job. A lot of the things they have to implement are mandates that are set down to them. It's not a lot of times their idea, and then they have to kind of sell it to the teachers. And so, I'm really on servant leadership. I think if you're a principal, if you're the bulk of your leadership style is not servant leadership, then you're missing a huge opportunity on building positive culture in your school.
Man, at this point, just from what I observe around the nation, I think we're getting to a point where I'm not even sure it's going to be possible. Like, if that isn't the foundation upon which you build your leadership style, I just don't even know how you're going to be successful in a school.
Right. And that's why many struggle. The turnover rate is about 3 to 5 years for the average principal now. So there's a lot of pressure on them. And one of the reasons I wrote it and named it Boot Camp was it's like accelerated strategies to help them, get up to speed quickly. One thing I always say is that when it comes to, like educational leadership and administration, like the certificate, the programs that educators go through, we do a good job of preparing them to be an administrator, but not so much a leader. And there's that gap there in leadership that really really is missing. And I think it shows. I think when you walk, I say all the time, I can walk in a school and within just a few minutes I can tell you how effective that their principal is by the culture of how the office staff talks, how people are talking in the hallway, how teachers are interacting with students. It doesn't take you very long to see the effect that the principal has on that school culture.
I agree. I always say that too. It's just like a seasoned teacher can take one step into a classroom, and within seconds they can kind of tell you what really happens in here on a regular basis. It's the same thing for schools. I've always said that, where you take 2 steps into the front doors of the school, you look around, you can feel that front office staff, and I know within seconds what kind of culture is really happening, what's really happening, the vibe of the school, I call it. And I think you're right, man, just making that distinction between administrator and leader. And of all that's going on with social media, for me, like, that's one of the things I'm excited about. I'm not sure there's ever been more of a focus on leadership than right now in education. And I think it's because there's so much information and so much being shared on social media.
Right. Well, especially the last couple of months, I think it's important. Sadly, I get messages from teachers that they've had to take down posts. They're kind of micromanaged on social
Yeah.
media, which I think is sad. But that is a very small portion. I think most administrators come on and hopefully get ideas and strategies, and are able to build their own professional learning network and grow from it. It doesn't matter how long you've been a leader. I think it's good to have a mentor, and I encourage seasoned veterans to actually connect with younger, like the generation or 2 generations younger than them, because they will give you insight. It's kind of like we talked about, when my nephew can teach me technology, when he was 3 years old.
Right.
As a leader, when you get that generation or two younger, they can help you understand how to relate to that generation. And that's important when you're in a leadership role. You think about in school, when you have teachers that have been in there for decades, you're potentially leading 5 different generations of people. And so they have different, incentives,
Yeah.
different goals, different motivations. And so, that's a lot to juggle. So you have to be open to learning and listening. And I think listening is probably, the one attribute of leaders that's kind of missing, that's probably the most important, is listening to their staff. Always tell people, how can you serve someone if you don't know what they need?
It's critical, man. I've always, that I'm thinking about it, I can remember being a first year teacher in the classroom, and it's clear, like I'm faking it. Like I have no idea. I went to all the classes in college for sure, and I student taught, but those weren't really my kids. That was another teacher's class, and it was her culture in her classroom. And, like I can't do better until I know better. And all that theoretical, all the stuff I learned in theory, I don't know about, it might happen in theory, but it doesn't happen in my classroom. And I think,
Right.
becoming a principal is just like that, where when you as a building principal, brand new principal of a school, it's that same feeling, but there's no one you can turn to in the school. As a teacher, there's a teacher next door I could run to for help. But as a principal, man, like you have to have that PLN in place and mentoring and some sort of a mastermind group you can call on.
Absolutely. And and I encourage especially new leaders to have mentors. But you always need someone that you can trust and have a rapport with to talk to. I do that with leaders in education, but I do that with leaders outside of education. I have some that I'll meet with once a month for coffee, and they'll share ideas with me. I'm not even in their field, but it's someone they trust, someone with some leadership knowledge, and that it gives them a sounding board, and helps them feel like they're not alone in their battle as well.
And at what point did your I mean, at this point, it's not an interest; it's more of an obsession with leadership, and you have a fascination with how these effective leaders are doing what they do in schools around the country. And at what point were you teaching? Did you think, what? I think I want to run this. I think I want to get in a position where I can create the culture of a school and run it.
It was um, probably seventh, eighth, ninth year teaching. I had already got my leadership degree. When I started the school, I just couldn't stop for some reason. Again, it came pretty easy to me, which is kind of weird, I guess, because I wasn't the best student, like I said, but I tested well and did well, so I just kept going. But I was teaching, and somewhere along the way with teaching, I realized that my students had needs that I wasn't meeting. The leadership part, there's 2 parts with recess and things, which we may not have time to get to tonight. We can do that another time. But with the leadership, I'm like, my students have talents and passions that aren't coming out in my lesson plan. And so, to make it relevant to them, I have to figure out, what's going on in their life. What do they like? What are they good at? What are they passionate about? And then I realized that, those are the things they should be focusing on, to develop to be better. And then I'm like, that's what teachers need to do too. Because the irony of teaching is we hire teachers based on their strengths, on their talents, what they do well, but then we manage them based on their weaknesses. I was hired my first year because, okay, you have this skill set. But then the first thing they wanted me to do was this appraisal cycle where I pick things I don't do well to focus on. And I'm like, you know, so that kind of began it for me as I'm like, what? All of us have talents. All of us have strengths. We need to develop them to be more successful. And that's when I kind of started looking, through my leadership. Again, my leadership class wasn't, it was administrative, here's how to do this, here's how to do the budget. And so there wasn't a lot of pure leadership. And so I just got interested in it on my own and reading. And I've actually been fortunate to interview a lot of really neat people, from Coach Bobby Bowden to I interviewed a lady. Her name is Rachel Robertson. She is the only female that she leads expeditions to the South Pole, and then they do research for months at a time. So I've been able to interview a lot of these really interesting people. And most of them have developed over time. They all may not have begun with a servant leadership mentality, but over time, as they've grown and matured and realized what worked and didn't work, oftentimes, more than not, they became more of that servant type leader, listening to the needs of their staff and trying to help them meet their needs and help them develop their talents where they would be more successful.
I when I first became a teacher here in Texas, and I remember, I have these kids in my classroom, and I just, I'm trying to figure out how to be the classroom leader. We called it classroom management back then, but I'm hoping we'll make a shift into the idea of classroom leadership. And I remember trying to figure out how I'm going to get these kids to get on the same page, and they're late and they don't have their stuff. And then I remember going to watch a football practice here in Texas. And I'm watching the coach out there, these football coaches, and they have these kids in 120 degrees running full speed head first with each other, and they're hurt and they're throwing up and they're exhausted. And I'm thinking, he has these kids running full speed 120 degrees and throwing up. I can't get a kid in my room with a pencil in the air conditioning. maybe I should talk to this guy. And you're right, man. It's like, when I realized that this coach, I mean, it's so much more than being a football coach. He's serving as that kid's father and giving that kid a reputation to live up to, and providing a family for the kid that he doesn't have at home. And that's, for me, when I started shifting some of my thoughts into that relationship building model, because it's just so effective.
Well, and I think you hit on something there with classroom management, and you're totally right. And I'm actually working on another book, and I'm not going to throw them all out there to pitch them, but whatever. But one of the things I think teachers need to understand is that they're not a teacher leader. I hate that word. It's been used for decades. They're just, teachers are leaders. There's no hyphenation. They are leaders. And so, again, in the classroom, they're not really given those tools to lead the classroom as effectively as they can. We give them gimmicks like, oh, stand beside the student and they'll stop talking. Well, that becomes a game to the students. It really is more about how to lead the class, the routines, the procedures, the expectations. When you having expectations, it's the whole Pygmalion effect. And so, for me, I always expected all of my students to behave and to do well. And when you have that expectation, then you do what you can to help them meet that expectation. And I think that's the part that's so important as well.
It really is. And, that whole classroom management model, that traditional model built on the foundation of rule 1, rule number 2, rule number 3. And it's always been in my mind, because I was, I had a lot of challenges as a student. I mean, rules are fun to break. Like, to break a rule and to get away with something, that's awesome, man. But when you have a core set of classroom values that this whole family agrees to, it's painful to break a value that a family agrees to. Breaking a rule, that's awesome. And for me, that is like one of the big differences between a classroom built on management and one built on leadership.
Oh, absolutely. And the thing we have to be careful, even with rules, is that we don't punish kids for being kids. And
Right.
so, one of the things that I share, and this goes back to that, if my teachers in elementary school didn't give us 2 or 3 recesses a day, I probably would have been kicked out of school. That was my saving grace. We went out and we played to one of us. We didn't have a set time limit, like 15 minutes. We just went out till somebody got hurt, because
Right.
we had the go round that was made out of metal and the 20-foot slide. So,
Yeah.
someone was, but we let, the biggest thing we're missing in the classrooms today with kids, if they're off task, you think about self-regulation, focus on task, behavior. If they're sitting still all day, of course they're going to misbehave. Of course they're going to be off task. We have to build more movement, physical activity, recess, and playtime in, especially for our elementary and middle school students. But every student, even every adult, needs that time, that break, that time to replenish, whatever we call it, we need more of it.
I just looking back, just thinking back, that was, I remember when I first started teaching, I remember, especially at the elementary level, I remember watching kids get in trouble for things I didn't even notice. Like,
Right.
maybe it was after lunch and boys are outside, punching each other in the shoulder. And then I saw it. Oh, you know, I kind of wanted to join in. It looked fun.
Right.
And next thing I know, they're taken down to the principal's office. Like, oh man, I missed that one. Apparently, that's, you can't do that. And it is a challenge, especially for, I mean, all kids. But I just know as a young boy sitting in the classroom, rows and columns, alphabetical order, and staring at the back of some kid's head for 52 minutes. That took a lot of effort, man.
Absolutely, absolutely. I got a spanking for skipping down the hall when I was in second grade, and kids can't even skip today, but I got beat for it.
Yeah.
Um, but yeah, we do. We've got to, like you said, we didn't even think about those things. The rough housing, that's all part of how, we weren't mean, we weren't fighting, but that's part of how kids learn.
Yeah.
We socialize. We talk about SEL, and we have these scripts, and we have these workbooks, but we don't let kids have playtime. We don't let them have recess. We don't let them have PE. That's SEL. That's where they're learning how to interact and, learn to deal with issues and, personal issues, etc. And, we cut that out.
Man, I think that is giving the voice to so many of the frustrations that we hear from educators, as they're all going to go back in August, we hope, and they're going to be in the professional development for the week before the kids come, and they're going to, okay, here's our new theme, and this is our focus, and it's going to be some sort of campus culture thing, and it's all be theoretical, and teachers sit there. I think the frustration is they're thinking this isn't real life, real for kids. I mean, this might work in our brains because we're adults, but this isn't necessarily going to work for kids.
Right. Well, and the one thing that we did right this spring is most states, I don't know about all yet, but I know a lot of states have, suspended the standardized testing.
Yeah.
And guess what? The world's not going to end because there was no standardized testing. And even the formal teacher evaluations, to me, that it's kind of like you said earlier. You can walk in any classroom, if a teacher is a decent teacher or not, instead of having these
Yep.
long, drawn out processes. And now we have some, because they haven't, some administrators haven't been in the classroom all year. They're wanting to do it through the virtual setting. And I'm like, well, did you hire your teacher to be a virtual teacher? How are you doing an evaluation that, makes any sense?
Yeah.
Um, you know, so, I'm sure we'll go back to testing, but to me, if we could cut out, a lot of the standardized testing and go back to, I heard someone say the other day that, I want to be a teacher, not a tester. And so, I think that's so true. We have so many tests that we give. This last month, everybody's talking about, oh, well, we got to finish strong. We got to, if we were in school, we'd be testing the whole time. There wouldn't be learning going on. So, we're not losing ground with the students right now. And we're actually relieving a lot of stress, from the pressure put on from that standardized testing. And even with the teachers, again, to have to, a good administrator knows if a teacher's effective or not. I think we put too much into the whole dog and pony show instead of just saying, here's what you do well, here's what you can work on. In fact, I encourage most principals to do some kind of aspirational conversation with their teachers. Yeah, you may talk a little bit about how they're doing, but get feedback from them. They're the experts in the classrooms. They know what's going on. Ask them, what are we doing well? What could we do better? What do you see that, other schools, or you hear from other schools that are doing better than us? What can we adjust? And then, all good leaders should be asking their teachers how they can help them be better. Are they wanting to move into an administrative role? Are they wanting to stay as teachers? We put so little value on the expertise of the teachers in the classroom, when a lot of times, if you have a veteran teacher, man, they probably have more leadership skill than a lot of administrators, especially new administrators. And
Yeah.
we don't take advantage of that knowledge and that the experience that they have.
One of the most effective first year principal experiences I witnessed in a long time was a gentleman here in Houston, and he was at a large, what we call a 6A high school, and they probably have 4,000 kids in there. And he's a younger principal, and it's a really big school. So I want to say they have about 10 or 11 assistant principals and hundreds of teachers. And he went to that school. He was a student at that school. He had some of his teachers were still teachers. He had assistant principals that were his assistant principal, and he had assistant principals that were principals at another building, and now they've dropped down to being assistant, and now he's the principal over all this. And I think one of the most effective things he did was right at the beginning, he asked everyone, what do we need to do a better job to help you, to serve you? And then they all wrote out and everything. And then within a day, he had this whole metrics things created so they could see. And every day he would score himself and the leadership team on how well they were doing according to what people asked. And then within a few weeks, they met back together. He asked, are we scoring ourselves accurately? Are you getting what you need? And I think that right there, just the fact that teachers were heard, what they were heard, and they could see the metrics of if the expectations they had were being met. It was just such a powerful moment for teachers they felt like they mattered.
Yeah, I mean, anytime it's just your vision you're trying to place on them, is never going to be as effective as getting their input and making our vision. And that, sounds exactly like what happened there. And that's so important. You gotta have their voice. You gotta, have that trust. You can't, a lot of times, I remember as an administrator, there's two things I liked. I liked feedback, because I hopefully had confidence that I was doing most things right. So it was okay to get feedback and input. The other thing is I never took it personal. Again, just like anything else, if there's a teacher that, may have an issue with you that's going to, be negative all the time or whatever. But for the most part, most teachers are going to be professional and be, they're going to be genuine in their feedback or their input. And it's good to hear that. And it's good to reflect on that and grow. Just like speaking, you ask for feedback when you leave from people, just like you're talking about people sitting around in a group and sharing feedback with you. That's important for growth. And as leaders, we need that. And the other thing, too, is it's okay to have people that do challenge the process. So often some leaders will take it personally that if you voice dissent, you're attacking me, or, you have an issue with me. And the reality is that, teachers are passionate, they're caring, we talk about they give 110% all the time. They're vested. So, if you have those that speak up, I'm not talking about, again, the ones that complain all the time that, ice cream's too cold, but the ones that, are genuine in challenging a process, it's important to listen to them and to know, what they're saying. And, let's listen and let's see if there's something we need to do about it. It's hard for growth to come if you just have yes people. It's important. I said I loved having strong teachers because they will speak up, but most of them do it professionally and in the right way. But those are the ones that I know are very passionate and will always give 110% as well. And those are the ones that they are team. Your best team players are better than any superstar because it's a team that you're working with. And man, I love those teachers that weren't afraid to speak up.
I think it's finding those leaders. That's what I was referring to earlier, talking about this new wave of an interest of quality leadership. It seems to me I have just come across more and more principals, superintendents, assistant principals, campus and district leaders who really are becoming self-aware and vulnerable and open to feedback and wanting it, not just wanting it, but just trying to figure out how to analyze it, synthesize it, and use it to become better And and the other thing is in those challenging conversations where we have people disagree, and putting those people in the room, I think it's always best. What I have found is to make sure that we're all on the same. Like, the reason that we're emotional, right, is because we all care. And we love these kids. We want the best for them. And if we didn't care, none of us would be emotional. We wouldn't even be talking about it. And so creating that foundation for everyone in the room is always important.
I think it was Andy Stanley. He's a pastor of a big church here in Atlanta. He said when your followers don't speak, they don't talk back, they don't speak up, that's when you know you're in trouble. And so, like you said, because teachers are emotional, and they are, and we all are, because we care about the students and we care about education. So we should want to hear, what they have to say, and that
Yeah.
is important. But I agree with you that some of leadership is people always ask me, are you a born leader or do you learn it? And I'm like, it's a mix, because
Yeah.
even as leaders, just like anything else in life, we all have certain talents, some the strengths that we're good at, but there's areas that we're not as strong. And but the one area we can all work on is that EQ, building relationships, listening to people, fostering that positive culture. That's what makes the biggest difference, and that really begins with trust. If you don't trust your staff, you're going to micromanage them. And if they don't trust you, then you're never going to get commitment from them. So at that point, you're working basically, we always talk about leadership is influence, and it is influence, but the type of influence you give will determine whether it's compliance or it's commitment that you're getting from your followers.
Man, that compliance versus commitment piece is huge. And I think I mean, just based on I haven't done the research, but just based on my anecdotal experience, it really a lot is to do with trust and like you said, man, trusting in our educators, because there is this piece to teaching that really is an art. For sure, there's some scientific strategies and processes and procedures and consistency in classrooms and all that thing for sure is important at times, but there's an art to it. And so when a leader comes in, a principal or assistant principal comes in and wants answers on why are you doing it this way with this kid, sometimes it's hard to put words because it's just a feeling you have. I just know what this kid needs. I can feel what this kid needs right now. And I think that's where the trust piece comes into play.
Well, and it is an art, like you said. That's why I'm not a big fan of the. I know we got to have evaluation and you got to have some kind of accountability, but I've always said you can walk into 5 classrooms and see 5 teachers teaching 5 different ways and all 5 being effective. And because it really is an art to it, and you're bringing your passions and your talents to it, just like my 7th grade science teacher. I don't remember any of the content she taught. It's been a long time. I can't tell you, one question on a test probably. I remember learning about space because I did do my science fair project on that. But it was the relationship. It was the connection that she made to sports for me and to the candy for me, I guess. But it was those things that had nothing really to do with content. It really is that art part, that we connect with a lot of our teachers.
Yeah, man. I always say, Doctor, I think it was Skinner that said, education is what remains after all that's been learned has been forgotten. And I think if he was around today, what he would say is, hey, man, that kid has Google on the phone. Like, they have access to the content, whatever you're covered in class, that kid can find it faster than you can describe it and teach it. So what do you really want for that kid? Because they have access to the content, and they're not going to remember gold is AU on the periodic table. They're not going to remember all that stuff. So what is the one lesson you want that kid, you want to instill in that kid and becomes a legacy for that kid's family, for that kid's life? That's the biggest question. And then how do we connect the content to that lesson?
Right. We really do have to. That's one of the things with standardized tests, again, is we're just dumping data to see if they memorize it. And and it's important to memorize some things. We need to learn a few things so that, because we do build knowledge base and then we can build on that. But yeah, like you said, if a class is nothing more than something they can Google, then, how successful are we? And I think the problem in our culture is we've always used to say knowledge is power, or, information, that knowledge is power. And but it's got to be past that. It's not, we can't just Google something and be an expert. We got to know how to use it, how to utilize it, how to execute that knowledge. That's what really, gives us power and helps us continue to grow. Is what we do with it. And again, back to what you said, if you make it relevant for the students, always say that, as a teacher, building that relevancy. We focus so much on students' weaknesses. I talked about earlier about how we do with teachers, but we do that with students too. If a student does great in science and poor in math, we focus all on getting them better at math. We want them just to be mediocre in math.
Yep.
Why are we not taking that science and letting them be a genius at science? They may cure cancer. Who knows? But we don't. We focus on what they don't do well so that they can pass a test. And the thing is, we talk about like grit. And I wrote something the other day, grit really is dependent on the person, what your interests are, what you're passionate about, what you're good at. That depends on how much you're going to persevere in something. But think about if our students in the classroom, if we're building on their talents and letting them taste a little bit of success instead of just always focused on what they don't do well, we're going to build their confidence. And when they taste that success and we build their confidence, guess what? They're going to try other things now. They're not going to be as afraid of failure now, because that's all they've known before. You're bad at this, so let's work on this. Let's take you out of PE and give you more math. Take away the very things they enjoy, or that, they come to school for, and we just focus on their weaknesses. And it's no wonder that so many students are turned off to education and feel like that it's irrelevant to them.
That whole grit thing is that has, ever since the book came out, it's been on my mind. And because I think about everything in terms of kids, I understand some of the principles from an adult perspective, and maybe people can take responsibility for themselves at the adult level. But for kids, I always think to myself, first of all, there are lots of kids that don't have an interest in the traditional topics and subjects that we teach in school. So already they don't have the interest. But then in addition to that, they don't have an inventory of success and wins where they've been, so they don't have something they can look back on and think, okay, well, if I tried really hard and I've been successful over here, so that's evidence I can do it again. And when you put those two things together, not a lot of wins, not a lot of successes, along with not really have a natural interest, then the whole grit thing really, that's just, the formula doesn't work for those kids.
Right. Absolutely. Absolutely.
Hey man, the other thing I was going to say is this is, what really concerns me is that kid that, you're right, let's say it's a kid that doesn't have an interest in math. His brain isn't wired that way. He just hasn't been historically successful, hasn't been taught to him in such a way he can learn it. And so the standardized test is coming up, and we've identified that kid. And now we're pulling him out of recess to we're trying to coach him up and teach him up and tutor him. And now we're pulling him out of art and pulling him out of the computer class and pulling him up. And then what happens is, because we have great teachers and we're trying to cram this knowledge into his noggin, now we've got him up to just barely passing. The score comes in, we pull him out of class, we cheer, oh my gosh. And now what we've taught this kid is how to work really hard at something you hate so you can barely get by. And then we wonder why people are in professions that they don't like and barely scrape by.
Absolutely. And we're not picking on math.
But, no, it's just the easy one.
Because I don't want somebody tomorrow to be telling me why was I putting down math. I love math. But yeah, that's the reality. It really is. And we talk about, even like with math, because I'm a big proponent of the kids need recess, they need movement. We need more movement in the classroom. Our classrooms are so sedentary. They need playtime. They need recess. Heck, I wish we had nap time again. On Twitter, I'm telling the parents, let your kids have a nap. Parents take a nap. You'll feel much better. But we need movement. We need recess. We need students to do that. But a lot of research shows that, like for classes like math or language arts, where students may have trouble focusing, if you'll do PE before that class, they're more likely to focus then. A lot of times we want like PE at the end of the day or recess at the end of the day. No, add them in during the day. A lot of people always argue with me about Finland because I'll share, statistics from Finland because, we're not the same country. We're so much bigger. But the things I talk about is like they give 15 minutes of recess every hour. So they only go to school for 5 hours a day, and an hour of that is recess. And so they outperform us on, they only give one standardized test in high school. They don't give standardized tests in elementary school or middle school. And so when people say that, I'm like, well, what does recess and not giving standardized tests have to do with how rich a country is or how big a country is? That's focused on children being children. And so that's why their children do so well in school, is because they are giving them that time to get out and move and run around and play. That's how children learn. And we, have systematically removed that from a lot of our schools.
If you for those I'm sure it's so much more difficult in a larger metro school district where there's 50, 75, 100 schools, but when you consult with those smaller school districts that really can that just really can rewrite how they do school, what are some of the things that you're sharing with them in terms of just learning styles and giving kids time and appropriate number of minutes for learning? Are they open to that stuff?
Well, yeah, a lot are. And actually, Texas, where you're at, is really doing a good job. Texas A&M has piloted several schools in Texas that are actually doing like the stand-up desk. I encourage things like a fitness area in the back. Where I learned this was actually I won't share his name, but he was a Hall of Fame pitcher for the Atlanta Braves. And I taught his son, and his son was just, bouncing off the walls all the time. And so what I did is I fixed a place in the back of the room where he could go and do sit-ups or planks or whatever for 2 or 3 minutes. And then he would come back and he would be fine for the rest of class. And, it was a distraction for the first 2 or 3 times. But I tell people all the time, kids are resilient. What becomes norm is the norm. And so once he, did that 3 or 4 days in a row, nobody even paid attention anymore. And other students like that I knew, like, do you need a couple of minutes, go. And so, but the behavior improved so tremendously that he was like, Brad, what are you doing in your class? Because, he stays in trouble in all of his other classes, but, he's behaving in yours. And I'm like, I let him go and burn that energy off. And so several schools are doing that in Texas now. But that and the recess, increased recess. But the thing is, it's called the executive functioning, and the frontal lobe of the brain is where that we self-regulate, like emotions. It's where we increase our focus and on task. And that area is actually developed from physical activity, especially like building the core and balance, like doing planks and sit-ups, things like that, actually improve that area of the brain where that it helps students learn to self-regulate better. So my book is called Learning on Your Feet, that I talk about this in depth and that schools use kind of as the guide to implement this. But we've seen it with especially special ed classes where the students, have trouble self-regulating and maybe getting exercise bikes. They may not be able to plank or, if they have physical disabilities, but if they can ride a bike for a few minutes or do some types of activities, man, it dramatically improves their behavior in class, which again helps them focus, pay attention, and, just creates that type of classroom for learning that you want.
Yeah, there's a gentleman, Derek. I can't think of his last name right now. He runs Stand Up Our Kids, which is a huge campaign, a huge push to provide just more desk options in the classroom and around the sides and the back. He sells a desk, and his company has desks where the kids can adjustable, and they can raise them so they can stand up and move a little bit. And I think also I noticed that some people are just afraid of the movement. I mean, they're just uncomfortable with the idea of moving kids, and they feel that it's chaotic. And what I always one of the schools we had just last week, we had Heather Patterson on here, and her previous school from this year over at Poly Ryan, I would go there. And to see what happens in that school and the chaos that they are able to create in a directed way, so in fact they refer to their cafeteria as Cafe Chaos, but they're going to direct it and they're going to control it, and they have all kinds of stuff going on during time where the kids are at lunch. But you know what? They have rehearsed it so many times that when it is time to line up and get back in class, it happens within 60 seconds to go from absolute what looks like chaos, but it's really controlled, to complete and focused, engaged kids in the classroom within 60 seconds. They've learned it. That's just what they do.
Well, it's just like the 15 minutes in Finland. The teachers will tell you if they take that 15-minute break, they'll get so much more out of those students in that 45 minutes than if they would have stayed in class for 90 minutes, because
Yeah.
you burn off that energy. You're allowed to like take that break and then refocus, and you get more done in that short amount of time. And, you talked about the chaos and the controlled chaos. I always joke with people all the time. It's like we want our classrooms to be like a museum, and they really should be like a construction site. The kids are learning, they're growing, not that it has to be this crazy, like you said, wild, just out of control noise. But, I have a problem when teachers think that students sitting quiet in the desk all day is, a learning environment. To me, it's not.
It's so funny you say that. I am when I go to it, we here in Houston, we have a membership to the Museum of Fine Art. We have all the memberships, and I go, and I promise you, I am in there faking it. I cannot I cannot sit there and just keep quiet and walk around quietly. But there are people sitting in chairs staring at a payment, and a painting. And now that I'm thinking back, I'm like, man, they would make an amazing student in the traditional classroom. And I cannot wait to get out of here, man. When do we go to the kids museum where we can, knock some stuff down and, all that interaction stuff. But you're right. That feeling is, for a lot of kids, it's just like, oh my gosh, can we please do something? Yeah.
Absolutely.
Hey, so for
And
your,
someone mentioned,
go ahead.
oh, I was just going to say, I saw someone mention like meditation, and that is good. I think physical activity is even better because again, it's working that executive functioning of the brain that will eventually help kids, focus, control, and self-regulate. But I think like meditation and different things are important and good to include in the classroom too. Because you think like all the stress that we have. Students have stress, teachers have stress, as adults we have stress, and we don't do a really good job of dealing with stress. I think they say that 75% of doctor visits, even if they're physical ailments, are stress related. So we need to do better in dealing with stress and handling stress and beginning with students.
How many books do you have? I think, is it 8? Do you have 8 of them published?
I think I have 8 books. Yeah, and I'm working. I have one coming out fall, and then I'm actually writing. I've had several teachers. Um, I try to be as inspirational and motivational as possible. So I'm actually working on a book right now that's gonna. It's Dear Teacher, and it is just a book of motivational quotes and some anecdotes to go with that to really inspire them, because that is my heart. Like I said, is advocate for teachers and encouraging them regardless of their circumstances. Sometimes I'll have them be like, I think of you as my principal. And I'm glad, because I do think that teaching is the hardest job in America, and and really in the world, because but being in America is why I use that phrase. But it really is probably the toughest job there is, and it's often one of the least respected jobs, unfortunately. But man, just like now in this pandemic, when we see teachers just totally change how they have to deliver information and working from home and with their own kids and not knowing, where their students are, how they're doing, just to rise to the occasion, just is amazing to me. And so, I always feel like anytime I can give back, it's just so important to let teachers know how much they are appreciated and to help, keep them motivated for the great work that they do.
Man, that is one of the just the beautiful things of this Facebook page, the Help a Teacher Facebook page, where what we have. Debbie has close to 500,000 teachers that come here regularly and look for posts and find inspiration and find connection to a community, and again, man, the evidence just that it makes a difference, that they're part of something that is truly making a difference in the lives of kids, and man, that's why you were such a great fit, and I can't thank you enough for being here. This is just an honor and just a real pleasure to talk to you.
Well, man, I appreciate it too. It was so neat to meet with you, and hopefully we can again. And yeah, teaching is such an isolating job, and they probably feel even more isolated right now at home. So it's good to be able to let them know that people do care and that we do know how hard they are working and appreciate it. So I appreciate you having me on, man. It's been a delight.
Awesome. We'll do it again sometime. Thank you so much, sir.
Thank you.
All right. Bye-bye.